was, reacting different to different situations. I was feeling more secure in myself. I was able to let things go a lot more easily. Um, and really, the only thing that had changed in my life at that point, because I was under pretty high stress, I was working full time, going to school full time, and I also had a part time job, believe it or not. And then somehow I managed to squeeze yoga in there as well. But I started to notice these things about myself. And really, the only thing that was different was that I was doing yoga. Welcome to the Abundant Yogi Podcast. Our mission is to help you live your most happy, healthy, and abundant life possible. Inspired by yogic topics and philosophy, we share our own experiences navigating life and business as yogipreneurs. I'm Kagan Harvey, coming at you from Dubai.
And I'm Amethyst, coming at you from Canada. Here we'll talk about health, wellness, business, relationships, yoga, and everything in between that we believe help create and encompass a truly abundant life. Expect to have lots of laughs as we never take ourselves too seriously.
Whether you're a yoga teacher, practitioner, or just want to live a more abundant life, this is the podcast for you.
So get ready to open yourself up to new ideas, habits, and practices that will move you towards living your most abundant life.
Hey everyone, from wherever you are, this is our first episode of the Abundant Yogi podcast. And this is both of our first time ever recording our own podcast. I know Amethyst has been part of some podcast episodes before, so my definite first one. So yeah, give us some grace while we experiment through our first episode.
Hi. This is Amethyst. So I think we are going to start by just introducing ourselves, mainly how we got into yoga. So I guess I'll just go first.
Go for it.
So I took my first yoga class when I was 18 and just graduated high school. My friend invited me to a hot yoga class and I went with her, and it was like a jam-packed, like probably like 35, 40 people, super hot,
Where was
dripping.
that?
It was at Moksha.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, now it's called Meta.
Yeah, I've been there.
But yeah, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just looking around and copying everyone around me. But then we got into Shavasana at the end of class, and I felt like the most amazing feeling that I've ever felt. Like I was just so relaxed, and I don't even know how to explain it. So I left that class, um, just like I want to do this again. And like I just graduated, so I didn't really know what I was going to do next. I had no plans for post-secondary. So I'm like, maybe this is it. And I really rushed into it. I think it was just like a few months later that I was on my way to India to do my yoga teacher training. And it was a big like culture shock, I guess. But also, I didn't really know a lot about the spiritual side of yoga because I had just been practicing like hot yoga, and I knew there was more to it, but at that point, I really had only experienced the physical practice. And then I was in India, and it was like super traditional yoga, very strict schedule, like up at like 5 a.m. every day, and just lectures and meditations and yoga classes all day long. Um, yeah. So then I came back and I started teaching. I started at this very small yoga studio, and every time I had to teach, I would get like so nervous. I had like anxiety that whole day leading up to the class. And I ended up just like quitting. I couldn't handle it.
Been
And
there.
so I convinced myself, I'm like, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I just love yoga as a practitioner, but not a teacher. And then not too much longer after that, I got pregnant. and I was always still doing yoga, but then I started doing prenatal yoga twice a week, which was like a whole different like thing. And I just kind of like fell back in love with it and was like, no, like you have to do this. Like something was just telling me that this is what I was meant to do. So I started teaching again. Got a private gig teaching a family, like a mom, dad, and two boys. And I think it was good because it was just the same people every week. And I was able to like get comfortable with them and really practice my teaching while I was pregnant too, which was kind of fun. Then after Castle was born, I'd like bring him with me to teach them. He was such a good baby. Like I could just teach a yoga class and he just sit in his car seat. Anyways, so that's kind of how I got back into teaching. I applied at a bunch of studios and I just went hard. I think at one point I was teaching like 15 classes a week, which was great for like just diving in and getting comfortable teaching. And the more I taught, the better I got. And yeah, but it wasn't very sustainable. I wouldn't recommend teaching that many classes.
How many were you teaching?
15 a week.
Oh,
Yeah.
I feel yeah. That's a lot with
Yeah.
a little one.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of driving around and just like it was at a bunch of different studios and
Yeah.
it was definitely fine for a while, but then it just took up so much of my energy and I feel like the passion started to fade. It just felt more like work.
Yeah.
I found when I could balance practicing and teaching, like trying to
Yeah.
practice as much as I was teaching, that's when I would teach the best and
Yeah.
feel the greatest.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that for sure.
So yeah, I guess how I got to where I am now, I haven't actually been teaching that much in the last few years. Before COVID, I had one corporate class and then COVID hit and that was canceled. And now I'm back teaching that corporate class and teaching at one yoga studio. And then starting this little yoga business with Kagan, our podcast, and hopefully some retreats down the road.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What a long but interesting journey.
Yeah. So just for some perspective, I am now 33, going to be 34. So that was like 18, I don't know. I can't do math on the spot. How many years ago?
12? No, 16.
Yeah.
Wow,
So
that's a
16
long
years.
time. I can't believe
Yeah.
that it's that long. It feels like not that long ago.
So Kagan, tell us about how you got into yoga.
So,
I learned about yoga actually first through you, Amethyst. I went to my very first yoga class with you, probably at that small studio that you're referring to. And I remember thinking, like, wow, this is really cool. And I liked it because growing up, I was a gymnast. So I, was used to arm balances and handstands and flexibility and all of these things. So, when I did my first yoga class, I was like, wow, I really saw kind of a parallel in a sense between yoga and gymnastics. So right off the bat, I was like really interested in it. But I mean, from that first yoga session onwards, it was kind of on and off. And like you, I did start going to hot yoga. But it was mostly just physical. Like, I hadn't really grasped the concept of there being anything beyond just the physical aspect for yoga. But I enjoyed it and I loved it and I liked the way that I was feeling. So I kept going. And I started to see some differences in my body that I liked. So for that reason, I kept going more. So I was doing hot yoga probably 2 or 3 times a week at this time. And with that, I think the consistency of it, I guess, without meaning to or subconsciously, I started to notice more than just the physical aspect. I started to notice how it was making me feel. I was noticing that I had less anxiety. I was, reacting different to different situations. I was feeling more secure in myself. I was able to let things go a lot more easily. Um, and really, the only thing that had changed in my life at that point, because I was under pretty high stress, I was working full time, going to school full time, and I also had a part time job, believe it or not. And then somehow I managed to squeeze yoga in there as well. But I started to notice these things about myself. And really, the only thing that was different was that I was doing yoga. So I started to see that there was a connection between yoga and all of these other things. So from there, I started to just get a lot more interested in it, start learning a little bit more about yoga philosophy and the principles and all of that. And that was probably, 2010, it would have been around then, and then progressively throughout the following years. And then um, by the time I had graduated from my degree and was working full time in HR, I had tossed around the idea of potentially doing my yoga teacher training, but it just really felt out of reach. Not only because of the cost, but just, I had just finished, 4 years of university, and I felt like, I was on this path of working in HR, and I couldn't possibly take time off to go and do, a month-long yoga teacher training. It just felt really out of reach. So it was just one of those things. And I'm like, that'd be cool if I could do it. But, if I get to it, I'll get to it if I get to it, kind of thing. And just went along my merry way. And then in 2019, my company actually ended up moving me to Dubai. And lo and behold, 2019 was when the big pandemic started. So we started working from home. And ultimately, I was able to do a yoga teacher training online because I was working from home. I was supporting Canada from Dubai, so I didn't actually need to log on until later in the afternoon. So my teacher training was in the mornings. It was 5 days a week. I think it was ended up being for 2 months. I can't remember exactly, but it was from 7 till 2 p.m., I think Monday to Friday or whatever the weekends were at that time, because in Dubai, um, the weekends used to run Sunday to Thursday. Can't recall. Anyways, I did my teacher training while I was working. And then, after getting my teacher training, we were all still working at home because Dubai had quite a strict lockdown. We couldn't leave the house. You needed like a permit to even go get groceries. It was quite strict. So literally I had nothing else to do than just my teacher training and work at home. So so I wasn't really able to go out and teach at a studio. But then as things slowly started to open up, because my partner MG, he's a professional golfer, so he has a lot of friends kind of in the golf world who had either themselves or their spouses were at home and wanting to do yoga but couldn't because the studios were closed. So he introduced me to a few of those people, and I managed to get a couple private clients. So I started teaching in people's homes in 2019. And then slowly from there, as lockdown requirements lessened and things opened back up and studios opened, I managed to get a couple classes at the studio. Meanwhile, I was still working full time in HR. I was just doing these things outside of my work hours. But I started to notice that how I felt when I was teaching yoga was a lot different than how I felt working my corporate job. And it took some time before I actually realized why that was. So I made the decision to leave my job actually in 2021. I decided, look, if I'm going to do this yoga thing, I'm going to commit to it with everything that I have. And if it's meant to be, it will be. And if it's not, I mean, at the absolute worst case scenario, I'll always have my degrees. I can always fall back on HR. So I was lucky in that sense because I did have a bit of a fallback. But I decided I'm going to leave my job and teach yoga full time. And so that is what I did. So from October 2021, I've been teaching officially full time yoga. since then, I mean, I still kept my private clients. I have more studio classes now. I have taken additional trainings. I've did my yin training. I've done my sound healing training. So yeah, I have kind of a mix, I would say, of things that I'm doing now with between studio and privates. I also teach corporate classes. I teach kids yoga. Every so often I'll get asked to do an event. So for example, we have this big fitness show in Dubai called the Dubai Active Show. So I got asked to teach a couple classes on stage there, which is really cool, and some other events. But yeah, so that's in a nutshell my journey, my story, and I would not turn back if I had to, if I had the chance. I'm full speed ahead, and yeah, I think obviously with all of that, there's lots of fear, and you go through self-doubt, and you go through periods of imposter syndrome, like, can I do this? Should I be doing this? Do I deserve to be doing this? But at the end of the day, I mean, I think these things are some of the things we're going to touch on in our podcast as time goes on. But at the end of the day, I am so happy that I made that decision and just trusted the universe. And yeah, that's my story.
Awesome. That is a great yoga story.
Thank you.
And I am so happy like how it's kind of like come full circle, because Kagan and I have actually wanted to start a podcast. We've talked about it for like years, but we just didn't really know like what we would do. I remember one time we were talking about doing like a dating show. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
But now it's just like worked out. Like it's like, wait a minute, we're both yoga teachers.
And it's so funny, like it just, again, how things happen in divine timing. Like it didn't work out back then because like it just wasn't right. But obviously now the time is right, which is why it's kind of just all coming to fruition in a really easy and natural way.
Yeah. And it's also kind of funny that we're doing it now that you live on the other side of the world.
Yeah, true. But thank God for technology. That's one thing we can probably thank COVID for, actually, is it made people a lot more connected, I feel like, in a way that they weren't before.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I like that this podcast will keep us connected.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's funny when we record, it's either like right before one of us goes to bed or right when one of us is waking up.
Yeah.
So anyways, Kagan, I want to ask you what abundance means to you.
Yeah, good question. Since that is kind of the theme of our podcast, what does abundance mean to me? So when I think of the word abundance, I think of the word fulfilled, or like plentiful, or like having enough of, or more than enough. So I think when you think of abundance in the terms of like living an abundant life, I think that it's just that sense, that overall feeling of being fulfilled, like the feeling of having everything, or feeling like you have everything that you need or more. And I mean, you can break abundance down into so many things. Abundance in the terms of being happy, abundance in the terms of being, fulfilled in your relationships, abundance in terms of being, financially stable. So I think all of these aspects kind of tie into it. So again, I feel like to live an abundant life, or to feel like you are living an abundant life, is that you feel fulfilled in all of those aspects. So let me turn that question around on you, since our podcast is called The Abundant Yogi, Amethyst. How would you say that yoga philosophy, or, the principles of yoga, can help a person find that abundance, to find that ability to live an abundant life?
For sure. So I think that through the practice of yoga, like physical and spiritual, like you're becoming a better version of yourself. And I think that in order to live a fulfilled life, or like the life that you want, you need to become a better version of yourself, because you're never going to have a life like it's the person you are. I had this worded way better in my head, but
Same.
like you're never going to have a better life than you are a person. I had a better way of saying that, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think a big part of yoga is also just like gratitude and being happy and fulfilled with what you already have.
Yeah.
Like, it's human nature to always want more, and I think it's good to have goals and be working towards things, but if you're not like living in the moment and appreciating the things you do have now, then you're just never going to get to where you want to be, because you'll never be fulfilled.
Totally.
And I think that yoga is just a continuous reminder of that.
Very well put. Very
Yeah.
well said.
In a nutshell, that would be my answer.
I like it.
think obviously in this podcast, we're going to dive a lot deeper into that.
Yes.
And give more practical kind of tips and steps and ideas to live a more abundant life.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are super excited that we finally started this podcast. We're super excited to delve deep into all of those topics and really just share our own perspective, our own advice and experiences so that we can help you live a more abundant life.
Thank you guys so much for listening to our first episode of the Abundant Yogi podcast.
Yes, and if you like what you hear so far, I mean, obviously it's just the first episode, but if you have enjoyed this podcast and think that this might be something that you want to continue listening to, hit subscribe. We have new episodes
every week.
Every week. I was going to say every Monday.
We don't know which day. Yeah, we haven't picked a day. But yeah, we'll let you know.
Yeah, so stick around
and maybe leave a review.
Not on the first one though. Give us a second chance.
Well, unless you liked the first one.
True. All right. Signing off.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Abundant Yogi podcast. This podcast allows us to step into our passion of helping others, so we hope that you can take away from what we share and be inspired to bring abundance into your own life, because you deserve it.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe or follow and leave us a review. Leaving a review helps us become more discoverable for other people on the path of living more abundantly. Once again, we thank you and wish you so much love. Until next time.